Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments when heaven leans close to the earth, when the noise of the world fades, and the voice of God becomes unmistakably clear, not loud, not dramatic, but authoritative, weighty, and full of purpose. In those moments, God doesn't always tell us what to say. Sometimes he tells us what not to say. Sometimes the most powerful instruction is silence, because silence protects what revelation is still forming. We live in a culture that rewards exposure, explanation, and instant sharing. We are trained to reveal everything, our plans, our dreams, our victories, before they are ready to breathe. But there are seasons when God says, be still, guard this, don't reveal it yet, not because it lacks power, but because it carries too much. Some things are holy, and holiness requires timing. There are mysteries God entrusts only to those who can steward them. There are callings that must grow in the dark before they are revealed in the light. Just as a seed must remain hidden beneath the soil before it breaks the surface, so too must certain words, visions, and assignments remain concealed until heaven signals the right moment. Premature exposure can weaken what divine patience would have perfected. When God says, shut up, it's not rejection, it's protection. It's an invitation into intimacy where trust is built not by speaking, but by listening. Silence becomes an act of faith, a declaration that we believe God's timing is better than our urgency. In that silence, character is shaped, discernment is sharpened, and authority is quietly established. Tonight is about understanding that obedience is not always loud, and power is not always visible. It's about recognizing that some breakthroughs are delayed not by resistance, but by preparation. When we learn to honor the moments God asks us to hold our tongue, we position ourselves to release his word with clarity, strength, and undeniable impact when the time comes. Silence can be an instruction from God, not a lack of direction. And this truth challenges the way we have been trained to understand guidance. We often assume that when God is speaking, there will be constant words, clear explanations, and detailed instructions. But throughout faith history, some of the most decisive moments were marked not by noise, but by stillness. Silence is not God stepping away. It is often God drawing closer, inviting deeper trust rather than surface-level certainty. When words stop, listening must mature. In silence, faith is stripped of dependency on constant reassurance. We learn to move, not because we heard something new today, but because we trust what was spoken yesterday. God's silence forces us to rely on relationship rather than information. It trains the heart to recognize that obedience is not always reactive, but sometimes sustained. Direction does not disappear just because the voice pauses. It becomes internalized, rooted, and lived out quietly. Many people grow anxious when heaven seems quiet, assuming they have missed something or done something wrong. But silence is often confirmation, not correction. It is God saying that what he has already spoken is sufficient for this season. When a parent trusts a child to walk on their own, they don't shout instructions every step. In the same way, divine silence can be evidence of trust, not distance. God is not absent. He is observing growth. Silence also protects us from rushing ahead of grace. Words can activate action, but silence teaches restraint. There are moments when movement would actually damage what God is forming. In those moments, silence becomes a boundary, keeping us from acting out of emotion, fear, or impatience. It keeps us from turning divine ideas into human projects. Waiting without new instructions refines motives and exposes whether we are seeking God's will or simply God's permission. When God instructs through silence, he is often shaping inner alignment before outward impact. The absence of new direction allows character to catch up with calling. Gifts can move faster than maturity, but silence slows the pace so the soul can develop strength, humility, and discernment. What is built in silence carries weight because it was not rushed into existence. It was formed under pressure without applause. Silence also heightens spiritual sensitivity. When words are few, awareness increases. We become attentive to subtle nudges, internal convictions, and quiet confirmations. The heart learns to recognize peace as guidance and unrest as warning. Silence trains discernment far beyond what constant instruction ever could. It teaches us how to hear God even when He is not speaking audibly, and how to remain steady without external validation. In seasons of silence, God often shifts our focus from outcome to intimacy. We stop asking, "What should I do next?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming?" Silence invites reflection, surrender, and trust. It dismantles the illusion that progress always looks like activity. Sometimes progress looks like restraint, patience, and unwavering obedience without explanation. Silence is not passive. It is deeply active. It requires discipline to remain faithful without constant clarity. It takes courage to stay obedient when there is no applause and no new revelation to share. Yet those who honor silence as instruction often emerge with clarity that cannot be shaken. They move with confidence, not because they heard more, but because they learned to trust deeper. When God is silent, He may be strengthening roots, stabilizing foundations, and preparing capacity for what is coming next. Silence becomes the soil where endurance grows, where faith matures, and where obedience becomes instinct rather than effort. In that space, direction is not lost. It is being embedded into the heart, shaping a life that responds to God not only when He speaks, but even when He chooses to remain quiet. Revelation grows stronger when protected by timing, and timing is one of the most overlooked elements of spiritual power. Many people receive something genuine from God but lose its impact because they release it too early. Revelation is not only about what is revealed, but when it is revealed. Heaven works with seasons, not impulses. And what is exposed before its appointed time can be misunderstood, resisted, or even destroyed. Timing is the shield that allows revelation to mature into authority. God rarely reveals everything at once. He unfolds truth in layers, allowing understanding to deepen before responsibility increases. When revelation is protected by timing, it has room to be refined, tested, and aligned with character. A word released too early may be accurate but incomplete. And incomplete truth can confuse rather than transform. Timing ensures that revelation is carried by wisdom, not just enthusiasm. There is a difference between receiving revelation and stewarding it. Stewardship requires patience, restraint, and discernment. Just because something is real does not mean it is ready. Just because God spoke does not mean the world is prepared to hear it. Timing allows revelation to grow roots so that when it is finally shared, it stands firm against doubt, criticism, and opposition. What matures in secrecy carries weight in public. Protected revelation develops clarity. In waiting, motives are purified and language is sharpened. What begins as excitement settles into conviction. What starts as passion becomes purpose. When revelation is held back, it is given time to align with God's heart rather than human reaction. Waiting strips away the need for validation and replaces it with confidence grounded in obedience. Timing also builds resilience. Revelation exposed too early is fragile. It can be shaken by misunderstanding or rejection, but revelation protected by time becomes unmovable. It is no longer dependent on approval because it's been tested in private. The waiting season strengthens endurance, allowing the message to withstand pressure without losing integrity. What survives silence carries authority when it speaks. God often uses delay as development. While revelation is hidden, the carrier is being shaped. The weight of what will be revealed later requires strength that can only be built in obscurity. Timing ensures that when revelation is released, the person sharing it is prepared to carry both its influence and its consequences. Without that preparation, revelation can become a burden instead of a blessing. There is also mercy in timing. God protects us from the damage of premature exposure. Some truths, if revealed too early, would attract opposition before support, resist, ants before understanding. Timing allows hearts to be prepared and atmospheres to be aligned. Revelation released at the right moment meets readiness instead of resistance, openness instead of offense. When revelation is protected by timing, it moves with precision rather than force. It lands where it is meant to land and accomplishes what it was meant to accomplish. It doesn't strive for attention, it commands attention. It doesn't argue, it resonates. Timing gives revelation the advantage of divine alignment where circumstances, hearts, and purpose converge. Waiting to reveal is not suppression, it is strengthening. It is trusting that what God has given does not need human urgency to survive. Revelation held in obedience gains depth, authority, and impact. When the time comes, it speaks with clarity because it has been shaped in silence, refined in patience, and carried with faith that honors God's perfect timing. Not everything God gives you is meant to be shared immediately, and understanding this protects both the gift and the giver. There is a natural desire to speak about what excites us, especially when it feels divine, meaningful, and full of promise. But spiritual wisdom recognizes that revelation and timing are inseparable. God often entrusts something precious before he authorizes its release. What is given in intimacy must sometimes remain in intimacy until it is ready to stand in public. God reveals things to shape us long before he uses them to shape others. Many truths are first meant to work inwardly, transforming perspective, refining motives, and deepening dependence. When we rush to share what God has spoken, we may bypass the personal process it was intended to accomplish. Some revelations are instructions for alignment, not announcements for attention. They are meant to be lived before they are spoken. Immediate sharing can expose something that has not yet developed strength. Just as a child is protected before being introduced to responsibility, revelation needs time to mature. Words released too early can be misunderstood or mishandled, not because they are wrong, but because they are incomplete. God often withholds permission to share until understanding catches up with insight. Silence allows depth to form beneath the surface. There is also the issue of vulnerability. Some things God gives are tender, still forming, and easily wounded by criticism or disbelief. Sharing them prematurely can create doubt or discouragement, not because the revelation lacks truth, but because the listener lacks context. God's restraint is often an act of care, guarding the heart from unnecessary resistance while confidence is still being established. Not sharing immediately trains humility. It confronts the need to be seen, affirmed, or celebrated. Silence reveals whether the joy of revelation is rooted in obedience or in recognition. When something can be held without being announced, it proves maturity. The ability to carry something quietly is evidence of trustworthiness. God entrusts more to those who do not rush to display what they have received. There is a difference between secrecy and stewardship. Withholding is not denial, it is responsibility. Stewardship asks not only, is this true, but also, is this the right moment? God is more concerned with impact than immediacy. He values fruit that lasts over excitement that fades. When revelation is shared at the right time, it carries authority rather than explanation. Silence also creates space for confirmation. What God gives privately is often reinforced through circumstances, scripture, and inner peace over time. Waiting allows clarity to replace assumption. It distinguishes between personal desire and divine instruction. In that space, understanding becomes stable, not emotional. What remains after the excitement settles is what was truly meant to be carried forward. God's timing ensures alignment. When revelation is released at the right moment, it meets prepared hearts and aligned environments. It does not strive for acceptance. It finds resonance. Timing turns words into seeds that fall on ready soil. Sharing too soon can scatter seeds on ground that cannot sustain them. Waiting positions revelation for effectiveness rather than exposure. Not everything God gives you is for immediate expression. Some things are for incubation. They grow in quiet obedience, shaped by patience and trust. What is held back in faith often emerges with greater clarity, deeper authority, and lasting influence. Silence does not diminish what God has given. It allows it to become strong enough to fulfill its purpose. Obedience is often proven in what we choose not to say, and this runs contrary to how most people measure faithfulness. We tend to associate obedience with visible action, bold declarations, and public steps of faith. Yet some of the deepest obedience happens quietly in restraint when the urge to speak is strong, but the instruction is to remain silent. Choosing not to speak when we could is often harder than speaking when we are told to, because silence removes attention and replaces it with trust. Words carry power, and because they do, they must be governed. Speaking without permission can create consequences even when the message is accurate. God's concern is not only truth, but timing, tone, and assignment. Obedience means submitting not just what we do, but what we say and when we say it. Silence becomes an offering, a surrender of our right to explain, defend, or announce ourselves. There are moments when silence protects alignment. Speaking too soon can shift focus from God's work to human opinion. It can invite unnecessary resistance or dilute the impact of what God intends to reveal later. By choosing not to speak, we allow God to remain the author of the story rather than attempting to narrate it ourselves. Obedience in silence keeps authority intact. Restraint reveals maturity. It demonstrates that identity is not dependent on being heard. When someone can hold truth without broadcasting it, they show confidence rooted in God rather than validation from people. Obedience in silence breaks the habit of self-promotion and replaces it with submission. It proves that the relationship with God matters more than recognition from others. Silence also trains discernment. When we do not immediately speak, we learn to listen more deeply. We become aware of inner checks, peace, and discomfort. Obedience sharpens the ability to distinguish between impulse and instruction. Not every opportunity to speak is an assignment. Not every truth needs a platform. Silence helps separate personal opinion from divine direction. There is also obedience in refusing to defend ourselves. When misunderstood or questioned, the instinct is to explain. Yet there are times when God asks us to remain quiet and let him clarify in his way and time. This kind of obedience requires humility and trust. It means believing that God can protect our integrity without our constant commentary. Choosing not to speak can feel like weakness, but it is actually strength under control. It requires confidence to remain silent when we have something to say. It requires faith to trust that silence will not delay God's purpose. Obedience in restraint develops authority because it aligns us with God's pace rather than our pressure. Silence also reveals the condition of the heart. It exposes impatience, insecurity, and the need to be right. Obedience confronts these tendencies and invites surrender. In silence, the heart is refined. Motives are examined. What remains is a deeper alignment with God's will rather than personal agenda. When obedience governs speech, words carry greater weight when they are finally released. Silence gives substance to future expression. What is withheld in obedience gains power because it was not wasted in impatience. The discipline of silence prepares the voice to speak with clarity and authority when God gives permission. Obedience is not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like choosing restraint in a moment where speaking would feel justified. It looks like trusting God with outcomes rather than managing perceptions. In these quiet acts of obedience, spiritual authority is formed, integrity is strengthened, and alignment with God's purpose is preserved. Divine silence builds character, authority, and discernment in ways that constant instruction never could. When God chooses silence, he is not withdrawing guidance, but deepening formation. Silence removes external support so internal strength can develop. It is in these quiet seasons that character is exposed, because without constant affirmation or correction, What truly governs the heart comes to the surface. Silence reveals whether obedience is rooted in conviction or convenience. Character is formed when no one is watching and no voice is directing every step. In silence, choices become honest, motives are tested without immediate reward. Faith matures because it must operate without visible reassurance. God often uses silence to allow integrity to grow naturally, not as performance, but as identity. When direction is quiet, the heart learns to choose what is right simply because it is right. Authority is also shaped in silence. True spiritual authority does not come from volume or visibility. It comes from alignment. Silence removes the temptation to control outcomes with words. It teaches restraint, patience, and trust. Authority grows when someone learns to wait without forcing progress. What is not rushed gains weight. What is not explained gains depth. Silence builds credibility because it proves that obedience is not driven by urgency or fear. In silence, the need to be heard is replaced by the strength to stand firm. Authority is established when identity is settled. God uses quiet seasons to detach us from approval, so our confidence rests in Him alone. When words are few, actions become consistent. Over time, consistency speaks louder than explanation. Authority formed this way does not need to announce itself, it is recognized. Discernment is sharpened in silence. When external voices fade, sensitivity increases. Silence trains the heart to recognize subtle movements, inner checks, and quiet confirmations. Instead of reacting quickly, discernment learns to pause, evaluate, and listen. Silence removes distraction and amplifies awareness. It teaches the difference between impulse and instruction, between emotion and insight. Without constant guidance, discernment becomes essential. The heart learns to weigh decisions carefully. Peace becomes a signal. Discomfort becomes a warning. Silence develops an internal compass that does not depend on noise. Discernment formed this way is stable, not reactive. It responds from understanding rather than pressure. Silence also, prevents spiritual pride. When God speaks less, there is less to display. This protects the heart from building identity around revelation instead of relationship. Silence humbles without humiliating. It keeps focus on growth rather than recognition. Character, authority, and discernment develop quietly when there is nothing to prove and no audience to impress. Many people resist silence because it feels unproductive. But silence is where preparation happens. God often withholds direction to allow capacity to increase. The weight of future responsibility requires strength that can only be built in stillness. Silence stretches patience, deepens trust, and strengthens endurance. These qualities cannot be rushed. In divine silence, reactions slow down and wisdom takes root. The absence of constant instruction forces intentional living. Decisions are made with care. Words are chosen with precision. Silence trains the soul to move deliberately rather than emotionally. Over time, this produces stability that cannot be shaken by uncertainty. When God breaks the silence, the one who has been formed in it speaks with clarity and authority. Their words carry substance because they were shaped in restraint. Their discernment is trusted because it was developed without haste. Their character is evident because it was refined without shortcuts. Divine silence does not weaken faith. It fortifies it, building a foundation that can carry influence, responsibility, and revelation without collapsing under pressure. Premature exposure can weaken a powerful calling, not because the calling lacks authenticity, but because strength requires formation. A calling is more than an assignment. It is a weight that must be carried with maturity, wisdom, and endurance. When something sacred is exposed before it has developed structure, it becomes vulnerable. God's delays are often defenses, guarding what He has planted until it is strong enough to withstand pressure. Exposure invites opinion, and opinion can shape direction if identity is not yet secure. When a calling is revealed too early, Voices begin to speak into it before God has finished shaping it. Expectations, comparisons, and criticism can distort clarity. Premature exposure shifts focus from obedience to performance. Instead of listening for God's voice, the heart begins responding to human response. What should have been guided by intimacy becomes influenced by applause or resistance. A calling grows best in obscurity. Hidden seasons allow mistakes to become lessons instead of labels. They provide space to learn, fail, adjust, and mature without public consequences. When exposure comes too early, growth becomes restricted. Fear of judgment replaces freedom to learn. Pressure replaces patience. Obscurity is not a delay, it is a training ground where strength is quietly built. Premature exposure can also create burnout. When responsibility exceeds capacity, exhaustion follows. God increases influence gradually so endurance can develop alongside it. When calling is revealed before endurance is formed, the weight becomes overwhelming. Passion alone cannot sustain purpose. Silence and preparation build the resilience needed to carry long-term impact without collapsing under expectations. There is also the danger of misalignment. Exposure before clarity can lock someone into a version of the calling that was never final. Early labels can limit future growth. What was meant to evolve becomes fixed because it was seen too soon. God often protects calling by allowing it to remain undefined until understanding is complete. Timing ensures flexibility and accuracy. When a calling is exposed prematurely, spiritual pride can take root. Attention can be mistaken for affirmation. Platform can be confused with approval. God often keeps calling hidden to protect the heart from building identity around function instead of relationship. Hidden seasons keep focus on who we are becoming, not how we are perceived. Silence also protects from unnecessary opposition. Exposure attracts resistance. When a calling is not yet strong, opposition can discourage or derail it. God's protection sometimes looks like concealment. What is hidden cannot be attacked. What is unseen cannot be prematurely challenged. God allows strength to develop before allowing resistance to test it. Premature exposure can weaken authority. Authority is formed through consistency, not announcement. When a calling is declared before it is demonstrated, credibility suffers. God often waits until fruit is evident before allowing visibility. Authority that grows in private stands firm in public. What is proven in silence carries weight when revealed. Hidden seasons are where alignment is refined. Values are established. Boundaries are formed. Discernment is sharpened. These elements create a framework that supports calling when exposure finally comes. Without this framework, influence becomes unstable. Premature exposure may bring attention, but it rarely brings longevity. God's timing is intentional. What he conceals, he is cultivating. What he delays, he is strengthening. Premature exposure can weaken what divine patience would have perfected. Calling protected by timing emerges with clarity, stability, and resilience, ready to withstand pressure and fulfill purpose without being compromised by haste. Trusting God's timing requires faith over urgency, and this is one of the most difficult disciplines of spiritual growth. Urgency feels productive, decisive, and responsible, while faith often looks slow, uncertain, and quiet. Yet God is not moved by pressure, he is moved by purpose. His timing is not designed to satisfy impatience, but to fulfill intention. When we choose faith over urgency, we align ourselves with a rhythm that produces lasting fruit rather than temporary results. Urgency is usually rooted in fear of missing out, fear of being left behind, fear that if we do not act now, the moment will be lost forever. Faith, on the other hand, is rooted in trust. It believes that what God has promised cannot be missed when God is the one orchestrating the timing. Faith rests in the assurance that delay is not denial and that waiting does not weaken what God has spoken. God's timing often feels uncomfortable because it confronts our desire for control. Waiting exposes our dependence on visible progress. When progress slows, faith is tested. We are forced to decide whether we trust God's character or rely on our own calculations. Faith chooses to believe that God sees what we cannot and is arranging what we do not yet understand. Choosing faith over urgency shifts how we make decisions. Instead of reacting to pressure, we respond to peace. Instead of rushing to secure outcomes, we wait for alignment. God's timing creates harmony between preparation and opportunity. When those two meet, momentum flows naturally. Urgency tries to force doors open. Faith waits for doors that open with ease. Waiting strengthens spiritual muscles that urgency ignores. Patience is developed. Endurance is formed. Perspective is widened. These qualities are essential for sustaining what God releases later. What comes quickly without preparation often leaves just as quickly. Faith understands that what is built slowly is built to last. There is also refinement in waiting. God uses time to remove impurities in motive. What begins as excitement is tested until it becomes conviction. Faith grows when external reinforcement is removed. When nothing seems to be happening, faith learns to stand without evidence. This kind of faith is resilient, steady, and unshakable. Trusting God's timing also protects us from comparison. Urgency thrives on looking at others and measuring progress against them. Faith keeps focus on personal assignment rather than external pace. God's timing is individual, not competitive. What He is doing in one life is not a standard for another. Faith honors uniqueness and refuses to rush because someone else appears ahead. Faith over urgency also guards peace. Urgency creates anxiety and restlessness. Faith produces calm confidence even in uncertainty. Peace becomes a sign of alignment. When faith is guiding decisions, there is rest even while waiting. This peace is not passivity, it is assurance that God is actively working beyond what is visible. God's timing ensures readiness. Opportunity without readiness becomes pressure. Faith trusts that God will not release something before the capacity to sustain it exists. Waiting is not wasted time, it is preparation time. Every delay is adding strength, clarity, and stability. Choosing faith over urgency is a declaration that God's wisdom surpasses human planning. It is surrendering the need to know when in order to trust who. Faith believes that when the time is right, movement will be unmistakable. Doors will open without striving, and what God releases will align with purpose, peace, and preparation in a way urgency could never produce. What is hidden now will be released with greater impact later, and this principle challenges the human desire for immediate visibility. We often assume that influence comes from being seen, heard, and recognized as soon as possible. Yet God's pattern reveals something different. He values preparation over promotion and depth over display. Hidden seasons are not setbacks. They are strategic spaces where strength, clarity, and authority are developed without distraction. When something is hidden, it is protected from misuse. Visibility invites interpretation, opinion, and expectation. While these things are not wrong, they can shape something before it is fully formed. God often hides what He intends to use powerfully so it can grow without pressure. In concealment, there is freedom to develop without being defined by public reaction. What is hidden is allowed to mature naturally. Hidden seasons cultivate depth. Without attention, the focus shifts inward. Character is refined. Motives are purified. Discipline is strengthened. In the absence of applause, obedience becomes sincere. God uses obscurity to ensure that when visibility comes, it rests on a solid foundation. Impact without depth is short-lived, but depth developed in secrecy sustains influence when it is finally revealed. What is hidden also gains clarity. In quiet spaces, understanding deepens. Distractions fade. Vision becomes precise. Without the need to perform, there is room to listen, reflect, and align. Hidden seasons remove the pressure to explain unfinished ideas. They allow truth to settle, sharpen, and solidify. When the time comes to release what has been hidden, it speaks with confidence and coherence. There is also strength formed in waiting. Endurance is built when progress is slow. Faith is stretched when results are unseen. These experiences create resilience that cannot be learned in visible success. What is hidden now carries the strength of perseverance later. It has survived silence, uncertainty, and delay. This survival gives it weight and credibility when it emerges. Hidden preparation also ensures humility. When recognition is delayed, identity is anchored in relationship rather than reputation. God often withholds exposure to protect the heart from pride. Being unseen teaches dependence on Him alone. When visibility eventually comes, it is received with gratitude rather than entitlement. Impact flows from humility rather than self-importance. When something is released at the right time, it meets readiness. Hearts are prepared, circumstances align, resistance is reduced. What was hidden gains momentum because the environment can support it. Timing transforms potential into effectiveness. The same thing released too early might be ignored or opposed, but released at the right moment, it resonates deeply. Hidden things also accumulate power. Like pressure building beneath the surface, waiting intensifies influence. Each unseen step adds strength. Each quiet act of obedience compounds authority. When release comes, it feels sudden to observers, but it is the result of long, unseen faithfulness. What appears overnight has often been years in the making. God does not hide things to forget them. He hides them to prepare them. Nothing concealed in obedience is wasted. What is hidden now is being shaped for greater reach, deeper impact, and lasting effect. When the time comes, what was formed in secrecy will not need to strive for attention. It will carry a weight that commands it, revealing that hidden seasons were never about delay, but about destiny being prepared to unfold with power and precision.